I'm going to be talking to Werner Antweiler, who is a professor of economics at the University of British Columbia, about the relationship between Canada and the European Union. And so the first interview was about the general free trade agreement that we have, CETA. And this one is going to be about other things like energy and climate and environment. So welcome to the interview, Werner.
Hello, Markham.
I would recommend any viewer, if you haven't watched the first video, please do. It's a very good explanation. Werner did a great job of laying out what the issues were and what the CETA looks like. Now we're going to talk about energy. And this came out of a June 23rd joint statement from Canada and the EU. So there were some talks and negotiations between the Prime Minister and his EU counterparts. And on the energy side, Werner, I have to tell you, I'm a little surprised. It included types of energy that I didn't think would be part of a trade agreement. I'm thinking primarily of LNG, liquefied natural gas, low carbon hydrogen, and renewables. Maybe you could explain how that fits into this agreement.
Yeah, some of these goals are very aspirational, and the economics is a different story. Ultimately, when it comes to energy, it comes down to where can we find supplies the most affordably. And that means when we're looking at Canada, we have energy production mostly on the West Coast and on Alberta, of course. And that's mostly focused on the US and to some extent now Asia, as we are developing resources like LNG. Now, when it comes to Europe, there's some oil production, of course, on the East Coast, but the supplies that Europe gets is mostly from other places. When it comes to LNG, it's virtually all from the United States. Canada does not have LNG facilities on the East Coast. So when it comes to energy, I think some of this is aspirational. The EU has climate goals. And so it looks nice on paper to write something into a trade agreement. The practice may look very differently.
Well, there's another thing at play here, and that is after Russia invaded the Ukraine, and a couple months later, the EU came out with Repower EU, which part of it was a three-point strategy to deal with Russia shutting off the gas to Europe. And one of the was to accelerate the electrification of the European Union members. So both on the supply side, shift from gas over to renewables, and on the demand side, things like electric vehicles and batteries and heat pumps and so on. And so thinking that Europe is somehow going to be a big market for natural gas as they electrify their economy to get off natural gas seems like it's a difficult fit.
Yeah, so there are two competing objectives. One is energy security. And here, the European Union was rushing to replace gas from Russia with gas from mostly from the United States and, of course, also Qatar and other places, but mostly the US, which actually has seen a significant increase in capacity over the last few years. So, in that sense, the US and the EU have moved closer together, at least under the Biden administration. Now we're in a sort of different state, but the US is very keen on continuing selling natural gas to Europe, and they will. Now, the other dimension of this is renewable energy. To really get off gas and oil, you need to build out renewable energy. That doesn't happen overnight. That takes 10, 15, 20 years. So the EU is moving very aggressively in that direction. But there are also limitations because they also have to build transmission infrastructure and other resources to make that happen. So in the short term, yes, natural gas. But that is not the long-term plan. The long-term plan is moving more and more towards renewables, and that means more wind, in many places also more solar, and that will also involve more storage.
Let's talk about low carbon hydrogen because 2, 3 years ago, I had Michael Lieberich, who's quite well known globally. He founded New Energy Finance, which became Bloomberg NEF. His argument is that the physics of hydrogen don't lend themselves to shipment in a pipeline or transportation in a ship. There just is too much leakage, and the temperatures you have to compress it at, yada yada yada. So now Europe is interested in hydrogen and has projects going on. Yes, that's absolutely true. But the likelihood of Canada ever being able to economically ship hydrogen across the ocean to Europe, after my conversations with Lieberich, I just can't see it happening.
Yeah, the economics right now is not looking very favorable in terms of long-term transportation or long-distance transportation. To the extent that you have existing natural gas infrastructure, it can be converted to use hydrogen. The pipes can be retrofitted. They actually have to be made tighter so that they're not leaking. Hydrogen is a lighter gas than natural gas, than methane. But that conversion is possible. And Europe needs process heat, and that only can come from burning something rather than from electricity. So to the extent that industry still relies on process heat, hydrogen is a viable substitute, but right now that mostly means it needs to come from existing facilities, and it has limited potential at this point. Now, in the long-term future, transportation would involve ammonia because that doesn't need as much refrigeration as actually compressing hydrogen to or liquefying hydrogen. So ammonia could be an interesting option because ammonia is actually also used directly in industry for various applications, making fertilizers and other things. So that could develop, but that is a market that will take time to build. And Canada is not well positioned because our natural gas resources are on the west side of the country and not the east side of the country. So I really don't see Canada filling a big a void here in the in the European market. I see the US actually playing a much bigger role for natural gas, but not for hydrogen because they're not really on that track.
Let's talk about nuclear for a moment. There was a part of this agreement that was signed on June 23rd was about Canada Euratom Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. What's that?
Yeah, so Canada, of course, is one country that has maintained nuclear resources for quite some time. We have the CANDU reactor that's using heavy water. It's a very interesting design, not one that has been replicated widely, but it has a lot of appeal in terms of safety and other features. So Canada also, of course, has resources in terms of uranium and uranium mining. And that could also mean that Europe could resupply itself from Canada when it comes to those resources. So I see more cooperation going forward on that resource side than actually building out new generations of reactors. Only a few are being built in Europe. The sentiment in some countries, such as Germany, is still relatively against nuclear. Excuse me.
Um, the next thing I want to talk about is carbon pricing because as part of the after the campaign, the federal campaign that we concluded in a few months ago, the federal government under Mark Carney has eliminated the consumer portion of the carbon tax. We still have the industrial emitters carbon tax in all provinces. Now, you would think by following that discussion that Canada was getting soft on carbon pricing. But in fact, in this agreement, there's a recommitment to pursue carbon pricing, and especially something like what the Europe has implemented since 2021, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Maybe you could explain this.
Yes, the EU has a carbon border adjustment mechanism that's like a carbon tariff on anything that's being imported that contains carbon. So steel or cement that all actually requires lots of carbon emissions in production and should be accounted for so that there's a level playing field between producers in the European Union and other countries. So when you import, say, steel from China, you don't want this to compete unfairly with steel produced in the European Union that is subject to the emissions trading system and the cap and trade system they have in the European Union. And so to make it a level playing field, you have to kind of account for all the carbon and make sure then all the imports are treated just the same way as locally produced steel and cement and other goods. Canada should do something similar because we don't have that. We have an output-based pricing system that protects our exporters, but the domestic firms are currently not protected against unfairly produced goods that don't face a carbon price, whereas our goods do face a carbon price.
Let's finish up the interview, Werner, with Canada joining the EU's Global Energy Transition Forum, one of which is and one of the principles of that is tripling the renewables pledge and reconvening the global methane pledge. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, especially when it comes to methane, that is one of the low-hanging fruits for making progress because methane emissions have been recognized in recent years as a much more potent source than we originally thought. There's more leakage. We have now better data. There's a new methane satellite that's actually monitoring it. And we do realize that this is a problem that actually makes a lot of sense fixing, because when you capture those methane emissions, you actually can turn them into something valuable. So it's a win-win for some of the businesses that are involved in capturing those emissions. It's good for the environment. It could be good for business too, because you actually gain something. You capture those methane emissions. So the methane part of this is really important because that is recognized as a significant new frontier. Methane is a more potent gas than carbon dioxide. So making progress on this frontier, especially here in Canada, where we have significant methane emissions, makes a lot of sense. And working with other partners actually to find solutions in that space is also important.
Well, Werner, this is the end of the second interview in this series. Thank you very much for your insights.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Mark.